Hello my dear friends and welcome to my channel. Don't forget to make yourself a cup of tea or coffee if you want, because today we have very interesting stories, and one of them is a story about a woman with a man who demanded OP tear his fence out cause of their children. Please subscribe if you haven't and I hope you'll enjoy it. Short introduction, my daughter, 7, loves playing Pokemon Go, and since I often have weekends off, we play together. Today we had a special event in the game where players could catch Clamperl, a mollusk-like Pokemon, for the first time since the release of the game. The argument was over the shiny variant, which is the same Pokemon with a different color scheme. Every player has a chance to get some of those during the event, but with those chances, you will see that some end up with many, and others with few to none. It requires some luck, but it is made in such a way that the odds of getting none are really low for those who put in the effort. We are quite active players and have met quite the odd people. From people raging because we took over their gym. Gyms are spots that you can conquer and change into your team's color for bonuses, to people commenting on the bad influences of mobile phones. Never something that truly scared my daughter though. Now, it is a 3-hour event and there are some great spots to go hunting, and with the ways to get Clamperl in mind, we walked the city in our hunt. We met lots of great people who were curious about how my daughter was doing. She is quite known in the community because of her age and energy. Because she is almost always non-verbal, it is tough sometimes, but people grew to love that about her. She sometimes speaks when gestures can't do the trick, but when she does, it is all copied lines that stick with her. She got the nickname of Bumblebee after the Transformers character because of it, and before you ask, she likes that name. She got an impressive 9 shiny Clamperls, one of which I traded over from my account, as she loves collecting shiny Pokemon, so she gets all of my spare shinies. I always keep 1 or 2 in this case, and we joined a group to do some post-hunt chatting as always. Here was a boy, around 12 years of age. He was part of the less lucky and ended up with only 2 shinies himself. So my daughter offered to give him one of hers, so he could get the 3 he needed to get the set complete. Clamperl can change into 2 other Pokemon, so you would need 3 to get the complete set. Those 2 are the reason I kept 2 myself. So they become friends in the game, and my daughter closes her game, to the boy's anger. She explains that they can't trade right now, as they first have to boost up their in-game friendship level. Since she does not have the in-game currency to trade now, trading costs less as your friendship level gets higher. But she would set one apart for him so they could trade in a few weeks. This caused the boy to cry and dad to turn from curious about the game to a red-hot raging bull. You will give the Pokemon to him right now, you said he could have it. She will keep the Pokemon for him, she does that for other people too, so she can use more of her items for herself as well. The witch will just let him wait and forget about it, then he will never get what she promised him. She won't, she has a system to keep track of what she will trade to people. So he will get the Pokemon. We travel a lot, so she often comes home with Pokemon that are only obtainable in certain places around the world, which she then shared with people in the community. And yes, him calling my daughter a witch did make me rethink her choice of trading, even though it wasn't the son doing the name calling. She is too dumb to remember anything. She will give him the Pokemon now. This is where he actually grabs my shoulders and starts shaking me around. Right away people jumped in to push him away. It all startled people, including my daughter, who is hidden behind me and shaking. My attention is with the dad, and I don't see the son trying to grab my daughter's phone. That is where she loses her patience and pushes him against the chest, causing him to stumble and fall. Many people saw what he tried to do and reacted at the same time, though the push had already happened and the boy cries. Dad is fuming, shouting all like, "I will punch your brat for that." And just wait for him to get her good. Meanwhile, we gather quite a crowd while dad storms back towards us. I learned later that at this point, cops were already on their way. I was terrified and standing that with my girl shaking behind me. I am skinnier than a walking noodle and only 5'8", my shoulders hurt, but never would I have stepped aside and let him have the tiniest of opportunities to get past me. Other people got that same thought and stepped in between the dad and me. There he punched someone straight in the face. Bad move, especially with the dozens of people watching. This is when someone from the crowd between me and him gets more actively involved. Later when exchanging information I would learn that he is in the training program for our country's equivalent of Navy SEALs, and he was there to catch Pokemon with his own daughter. While he first joined the crowd to subtly influence the escalation on both sides, so things wouldn't run out of hand, he had decided that dad just massively crossed the line. He tackled the dad and held him down, all while the dad was shouting more and more insults. Police arrive and start by getting information about what happened. Dad tries to pin it on me first, saying that I punched his son. Though he was quickly corrected by practically everyone there. Police cuff him with help of the man who got him to the ground, for which they require to cuff his hands, his feet, and then even his hands to his feet, because he kept thrashing around. He was put in the police van and I, together with the guy he punched, pressed charges for threats and acts of violence. His son didn't have a bruise, and he was actually crying more because of the riot that occurred, though he was still taken by the police as well, and will have to explain why he tried to steal the phone. In my country, children of 12 and up can get arrested and go to trial for crimes, usually aimed at getting additional behavioral education, but also a fine or jail in some cases. He kept on screaming that my daughter had to set the Pokemon apart, and she just shook her head in reply, while clenching to me so tightly, I was left with even more bruises from that. Eventually the place calmed down as the police left, and I spent some time calming my daughter. She sat with the Navy SEAL's daughter for a while, and they compared the different Pokemon they had. She is still shaken up and laying in bed with me for the night, but I am just happy things didn't end up worse. We had our run-ins during our time playing the game, but this has to be the worst. I guess I will never understand what drives people to go to such extreme lengths for just a game. Luckily we have a great community that I know will move mountains, if that would be needed to make my daughter feel completely safe again. Holy crap. Raging over a digital thing. How crazy are these people? Hope you and your daughter are okay now, and this man will get proper punishment. Past. Me, ED. Entitled Dad, EM. Entitled Mom, Cop 1 and Cop 2. For a little bit of context, I live in a duplex with some of my family. I live on the bottom floor while my grandparents lived on the top floor. One spring, we tried planting in new bushes and flowers in our backyard, only to discover that deer were jumping over our little fence and eating the plants. Since we were tired of dumping money on plants that would be destroyed, we instead decided to build a taller wooden fence along the old metal meshed fence. It worked perfectly. No deer or other critters in our backyard, and our foliage began to grow beautifully. Enter the drama 1 month later. I get home from work one afternoon and see the person who I've casted as EM leave our front porch where my grandparents are, with an unhappy look on her face, walking back across the street to her house. I ask my grandparents what happened, to which my grandmother told me that her 2 kids, both 4 to 5 years old, were upset that we put the fence in our backyard to keep the deer out, and that it was blocking the kids' view from their bedroom to view the admittedly beautiful creek that ran behind our house. Quick note. I have been in the exact room her boys were in as I've been over to their house when it was owned by the previous owner and his sons. You can easily see the creek behind our house, across the street from their window. My grandparents told EM that we wouldn't be tearing it down, and that's when she left. The next day, on my day off from work, I'm home by myself, drinking coffee and watching some Game of Thrones in the morning, roughly 10-11 a.m. Then, there's a knock on my front door. I take a quick peek through my living room windows and see that it is in fact EM. Luckily, my living room door connects to the hallway, and there's a table with a lamp on it right next to the door that I place my phone on and hit record. Call it intuition, paranoia, or instinct, but something told me to use my phone. I open the door and we both exchange the usual greetings. Then, we get to what was talked about yesterday. Do you live here? Yes. Me being confused. Okay, so are you aware of the fence in your backyard? Yeah, I help cement the poles and hammer on the planks. Well, you see, there's a beautiful creek that runs behind your house that my boys loved looking at that's now blocked. Do you think you can tear it down for them? I made sure I politely told her no, and then explained why we put it up in the first place. Em told me that it was unfortunate I decided not to, and then left. I went to my phone, made sure I got the recording, and discovered that the audio was crystal clear. This will come in handy later. A few hours later, I hear another knock at my door. I peek through my living room windows and see that it is in fact ED. I repeat the same process I did before, and the conversation went as follows. Was my wife over here earlier? Yeah. Did she talk about your fence in your backyard? Yeah, well, listen buddy, you would really be doing me a favor if you tore that down, so I won't have to hear her nag for the next week. So could you help me out here? That's really unfortunate, but as I told her, I'm not going to tear down something that I helped put up and paid for. Well, that is unfortunate. Ed said his farewells and we both depart. 10 minutes later I get another knock on my door. This time, it's two cops with EM behind them and Ed watching across the street. I open the door and ask them what the problem is. Cop 1 tells me that I said that I have been yelling at her, Ed, and their two kids for no reason, and both of them approached me to discuss this like adults, to which I insulted them by calling them names and making fun of their weight. Both of them were clearly obese. I explained to both officers just how absurd those claims were and offered them video from my phone to confirm it. Immediately EM starts to freak out. He can't record me, that's illegal. Arrest him. Ma'am, it's on his property, he has the right to do so. Now, if you please wait across the street. Unbelievable, so I show both officers the videos on my phone and they start smirking and nodding their heads up and down. Cop 2 mentions how that's pretty pathetic, how they're upset over something they can't control. Cop 1 says that I'm pretty much off the hook, but just so it looks like they didn't come out here for nothing, they asked for my license to run, which I gave consent. Cop 1 took my license and went over to EM and ED for the same thing. Both pulled out their licenses and handed them over to Cop 1. Cop 2 waited with me just in case. I could see Cop 1 in his car running our licenses. He gets to the last one and then stops for a good 5 minutes, then I heard his voice come over Cop 2's radio. Cop 1. John, not real name obviously, come over here. Cop 2. Roger. Cop 2 told me not to move as he went over to the squad car. After a 5-minute discussion, Cop 2 jogged over to me and handed my license back to me. I asked him if everything was okay, to which he said that I was in the clear and could go back inside. I decided to sit on my porch to see what would happen next. Both police officers went over to ED and EM and after a few moments, hand back EM her license, to which EM yells the loudest what I've ever heard in my life. The two cops then put ED in cuffs and give him his Miranda rights as they escort him into the cop car. EM starts going berserk. Ugly crying, runny nose, the works. After they drive off, EM yells at me across the street, saying how it's my fault for what just happened. To which I replied that I'm not the one who called the cops. She replied by shouting whatever. About 10 times as she started to walk back to her house. I see a school bus turn the corner at the end of my street, at which point I shouted at her, now how are you gonna explain this to your kids? EM, as loud as she could possibly yell, screams for me to go screw myself as she breaks the glass in her door as she slammed it shut. I really couldn't hear anything from her house, except for the occasional angry outburst. And, believe it or not, nothing happened for a few weeks. Then a month. 2 months passed. Then one day I come home from work and see a foreclosure sign out in her front yard. By sheer dumb luck, my house hosted my cousin's birthday party and my aunt invited several of her friends over. One of her friends just happened to work for our town's police department as a clerk. My aunt's friend heard about the foreclosure across our street and wanted to know what happened. It was a nice home after all. After I explained what happened, her jaw hit the floor and then she told me exactly why ED was arrested. As it turns out, there was a warrant out for ED's arrest for armed robbery all the way back in the 80s. That's not all. He committed the crime in Ohio and crossed state lines to live in New York, thereby nullifying statute of limitations. The only reason why he was finally caught is because the town he committed the armed robbery in finally entered the 21st century and digitized their paperwork just a year earlier. She knows this because she had to file the paperwork to extradite him back to Ohio. 2 months after the party, EM and her kids get evicted and I never see them again. The property is still on the market, though I can easily see it being bought soon enough. The only ones I feel bad for are the kids. They really didn't do anything wrong, but the messed up other side of the coin with that is if, logically speaking, they didn't cry about my fence, their dad wouldn't have gotten arrested that day. But, I tell myself that he would have gotten caught sooner or later, so it was bound to happen. Odd, I love this story, it's so fun that she was the reason her hubby is in jail now. And I have a hunch that the kids didn't give a crap about the fence, it was her that wanted it gone. I worked in a credit card call center as an escalation specialist, as in, the person you talk to when you ask for a supervisor. I received an escalated call from a man who had just applied for a store credit card a few days prior. A bit of info that's important to know. When approved for the card in a store, the customer is provided with a temporary shopping pass that lasts 24 hours. There is literally zero way to extend it or offer a workaround. If they need to make a purchase on the card after that period, they have to wait for the physical card to come in the mail. With that in mind, this man made a purchase of about $300 on the day he got the card and had now come back to buy some more a few days later. I explained the impossibility of his request and that I couldn't give out his account number over the phone to anyone ever. I'd get fired on the spot if I did, and I'm not getting fired for any customer, hell that, but he wasn't having it. "But this card is the only way we can feed our kids," he screamed. "They're going to starve without this." "I'm sorry," I apologized. However, as I said, there is no possible way to make the temporary pass work anymore, and we are never allowed to provide an account number over the phone. Yes, some of you out there will side with this guy right away. "Starving kids," he said. "Starving kids, why aren't you doing what he wants?" I'll circle back to that shortly. After a few more minutes of the man arguing about it, calling me a monster and a few other insults, and insisting he needed to use the card to feed his kids, his wife grabbed the phone out of his hands. She unloads into me with the same stuff, various insults, threatening my job, and when I tell her as I did him that there wasn't anything I could do, she screamed the following as loud as she could. "You'll have to answer to God for letting our kids starve." "Well, since you mention God," I replied, tired of going in circles with him. "You should consider visiting your local church or food shelter. They won't let your kids starve." They hung up immediately. That was a bit snarkier than I usually was, but it felt warranted. Before you consider me heartless, working in the call center taught me one thing. People lie a lot. Constantly I caught people in lies. Sometimes it's as obvious as them claiming they or the previous rep did or didn't say something on a previous call, but they're recorded in 99% of the time the customer was lying. I've gotten calls from people saying their mom died the previous month, so they need a fee waiver, only to look and see they've called in with that exact same reason 4 to 8 times spread out over a few years, basically any time they got a fee. It's really numbing. However, even if these parents were being truthful, why on earth would it come down to a call center employee, most of whom, especially in a bank, are heavily restricted by laws and company policies in what we can and cannot do to save your kids from starvation? Now comes the kicker. After the call I looked up their purchase information from the pass, that $300 purchase. It was a TV. This means either 1, their kids weren't starving, and they are truly horrible people for using fake starving children to try to bully an employee to do what they want, or 2, their kids were really starving, and they are the worst parents and planners ever for choosing to buy a TV instead of food. If it really was that bad, they could return the TV and get cash back instead of credit on their card and use that to buy food. I guess the kids weren't that starving to give up any luxuries, just starving enough to berate, insult, scream at, and threaten a complete stranger over the phone. After seeing that, I really wished I'd thought to look it up while they were still on the phone. I feel like the call would have taken a much different turn with that information. Should have thrown the TV in their face with that exact suggestion. If your kids are so hungry, take the big screen TV you just bought back and use the refund to buy food. Well guys, that's it for today. If you end up enjoying this video, please consider subscribing, and if you missed the last episode on the channel, I'm gonna link it right here. The story is about a woman who demanded OP should give her son an expensive bowling equipment. Check this out if you haven't, and I'll see you in my next video.